When you make cards, are you a planner or do you wing it? Hi, I'm Ardith, and today I'm going to share my card making planning process. To be honest, I'm more of a wing it girl, but I'm going to show you how both methods can work together to give you beautiful results and even get you out of a creative jam if you need it. Today's video is the 2020 installment of a collaboration I do with Ingrid, where we give you lots of inspiration for Christmas. So when you're done here, you can head over to her channel to see her ideas. I made 5 cards for this video, and when I'm trying to make a lot of cards from just a couple of stamp sets, I usually start with a plan because I want to get a lot of techniques and styles to show how much you can get from limited supplies.
This year I'm working with the new Catherine Pooler set called Peace, Love, and Holly, along with the All Round Wishes set. The All Round Wishes set has 2 big Wishes stamps in different styles, along with a 2-layered Wishes die in yet another font, so there's lots of opportunities to mix and match and get different looks. The rest of the words are in a neutral, all-caps font, and they span lots of occasions, including birthday, holidays, get well, as well as more generic warm or best wishes. And you can even build happy birthday and other short phrases just with these words. Peace, Love, and Holly has a number of outlined botanical images ranging from big swags of holly and pine to smaller single holly, branch, and berry images, as well as 3 sentiments. There are matching dies available, and there's a previously released Peace and Joy die that works perfectly with this set. Or any set, really, but it's similar to the Peace, Love, and Joy sentiment in the set. I'm supplementing these 2 sets with a couple of other older goodies, including one of the Snowflakes from last year's Chillin Snowflakes stamp set, and the mittens from an older set called Holiday Mittens, which seems to be retired now, but you'll see how it worked perfectly for my design, which wasn't planned, by the way. Let's get started with the first card, which is the top card on my plan, and it uses Peace, Love, and Holly. It was about now that I realized, although I had planned layouts, I really hadn't planned any kind of techniques or colors. And as I said, this set has a classic feel, so I decided to watercolor 2 of the big swags of holly. I started by dusting my watercolor cardstock with anti-static powder, and then I stamped with a lovely, new, sticky Wow embossing ink pad in one corner of the cardstock. I tried to get it close to the edge so I could simply turn the cardstock and get my other image on the same piece of cardstock. I stamped them both twice, but with this new ink pad, I don't think I needed to. Then I got out my metallic gold rich pale embossing powder, and I sprinkled it over the images, just over a piece of recycled newsprint. I'm trying out a new gray silicone craft mat as my work surface, and while it's really good for lots of things, it is not easy to clean up embossing powder or glitter from it. I heated up the embossing powder with my heat gun and my signature foil-lined shoebox lid. This is something that is really easy to make at home, and it saves my fingers from burning since I don't have to hold on to the cardstock, and I think the foil helps reflect back some of the heat so that warping is reduced as well. This is one of my most used tools in my craft room, and it cost me nothing since I had the lid and foil at home. Once it was all melted and smooth, I started watercoloring with the new Deck the Halls color, which is a rich Christmas green. You can smoosh your ink onto a craft sheet or palette, but I just used the lid of the ink pad by pressing it so that the ink pad smooshes into the lid. You do want to be careful not to press too hard and crack the lid, but it works really well as a palette, and whatever I don't use this time will be there next time I watercolor with this color. Catherine's inks layer up nicely to give more variation and depth, and that really helps to bring these images to life. I put small amounts of ink in the bases of each leaf. Then I did the berries with Cranberry Fizz. They're really small, so it's not as much painting as it is placing the ink into the little wells created by the heat embossing. I added some Aquatini for the other leaves in the arrangements, and this color brings a nice modern twist to the traditional colors I've been using so far. Finally, I wanted to add some yellow to the centers of the flowers, but my sauna ink pad was dry enough that when I squeezed it, nothing was hitting the lid of my ink pad. Rather than trying to squeeze it harder, I simply put the lid down on my work surface, and then I smooshed the edge of one end of the ink pad into it. So now I had 2 classic-looking arrangements of festive greenery. I needed a plan for the card base. I thought it would be pretty to have a dark background and really make the gold embossing in the watercolor pop. I quickly smooshed some juniper mist ink onto my craft mat, spritzed it with some water until it beaded up, and then I pressed the cardstock into it. I did it a few times, trying to build up some layers and depth in the navy color. And then my plan spun out of control. Usually to deepen navy, I add a bit of dark purple, and I even had it out on my desk. But then I brilliantly thought that to keep it in the same tone, I should use Cranberry Fizz instead of the purple. Wrong! jump ahead and here's what I got. It's not a bad background and I did keep it, but it was a complete mismatch for the delicate classic feeling of the foliage. A flat navy panel might have worked better, but I gave up on that and I went right back to a plain white card base. I arranged the two images onto the card in kind of an oval wreath, with a rectangular opening in the center which matches the shape of the peace, love, and joy sentiment really well. I stamped that directly onto my card base with the embossing ink and then I heated it. I attached the foliage with foam tape for some dimension, and that makes the gold sentiment look like it's recessed a little bit. This festive card is traditional and pretty, but for the next card in my plan, I want to see if I can use this set to get a different look. To do that, I'm going to use this new tool called a Tondo. It was developed by my friend Katya, and she's selling them on her website if you're interested. I'll link it below. This is the mini version, and it's perfect for a card front. Although it's used to create wreaths in a similar way as the Wreath Builder stencils, there are some key differences. First, this sturdy octagonal tool works for a variety of sizes of square cardstock. The markings on it range from the maximum of 4.5 inches down to 3 inches, but you could probably even go smaller if you wanted to and had small enough stamps to fit. The second big difference is that you tape the paper to the tool with temporary adhesive and then turn the whole tool between stamping, not just the cardstock. I'm using some of the smaller images from the Peace, Love, and Holly set to create my wreath, and you can see how I'm turning the whole tool, which keeps the paper precisely in place to create the round wreath shape. I started with the bigger holly image, and now I'm going back in and filling in the spaces with some of the smaller images. First, I put the branch facing toward the center of the wreath, and now I'm using the same stamp in a different orientation to fill the outer edge of the wreath. Making a wreath with whatever tool you have is a great way to use smaller stamps, and these tools give you the ability to quickly and accurately create symmetrical designs. Now I've got a pretty wreath at this point, but here's where I saw an opportunity to add to my original plan by filling in the four corners with some other image stamps. I placed a little branch stamp in the corner, and this time I have to skip a side when I turn it, so that the next time I stamp down, it will be in the next corner of the square piece of cardstock. Once I had those four filled in, I put the branch back on to fill those last spaces in the four corners, and this tool allowed me to have it hanging over the edge of the cardstock, and then I stamped them in place. Whoops! The edge of one last little berry stamp fills in the very last spaces. Again, it's hanging over the edge of the cardstock. And now my modified wreath is complete. Just to note that the Tondo is really easy to clean. The ink that ended up on the tool when I stamped off the edge came up with a baby wipe. Next comes a bunch of coloring. I started by putting some gray shadows down with a Copic marker just along the edge of each of the images to create some dimension. Then I colored in the berries with 2 shades of red. First, I went over all of them with R35, which is quite a light pinky red. Then I put a dot of R39 on each of them to give the look of shadows. When I was done with the berries, it was either a design revelation or just fatigue that made me look at it and think I could just leave the leaves gray and white rather than the more traditional colors of green. And this is what I mean. You may have a plan like I did here, but there's nothing saying you can't change the plan along the way. To add some shine and dimension, I put a dot of Nouveau Crystal Glaze over each of the berries. I find this stuff easier to work with than glossy accents. It's a bit runnier, so you do have to get used to it not squeezing too hard, but I've never had it clog the nozzle, which was a problem I used to have. This time for my sentiment, I stacked up 3 of those Peace and Joy die cuts, cut from white cardstock with my Gemini Junior. I was thinking that it might be easier to work with a sturdier die cut for a direct-to-paper technique with my Cranberry Fizz ink, and it was. But I still ended up with some very inky fingers, so I haven't completely solved that problem yet. I spritzed the die cut with my favorite Avery Elle Clear Shimmer Spray, and then I glued it to the center of the card. I trimmed down the panel and I put it on a white card base for another elegant and fairly traditional Christmas card. This next card was also on my plan, and it was based on the sentiment Warm Wishes. I find that I'm often very literal, so I was looking for something warm to put on this card, and I came up with these mittens. I didn't realize that they were retired, and I'm sorry about that. I have linked the rest of my supplies in the description below. Anyway, my idea was to use this scripty wishes stamp and intertwine the mittens somehow. But even with my plan, I didn't realize until I actually got the stamps out that the cord between the mittens forms a little letter E. So I grabbed the opportunity to make that part of the design by using it instead of the E in the wishes stamp. Of course, this made the stamping a little more complicated. I needed to stamp the wishes word without the E, so I used some washi tape to cover it up before stamping it with black ink. By the time I got the washi off the stamp with my craft pick, I knew the ink had dried up a bit and I wouldn't get a great impression, so thank goodness for the MISTI, because I was able to repeat the process and get a really clean sentiment stamp down. Then I just moved the cardstock over a bit and I positioned the mitten so that the cord looked as much like an E as possible, and I stamped that down. And here's where I made a little mistake, which planning more thoroughly might have avoided. I didn't have to stamp the mittens, and it would have given me more flexibility in the next step if I hadn't, but it's a mistake I can live with. This set had matching dies, and I cut 2 of the mittens along with their cuffs from white cardstock, and then I used my Catherine Pooler color swatch chart to get the Copic markers that best match Cranberry, Fizz, and Deck the Halls. I stamped one of the little branch images from Peace, Love, and Holly onto each mitten, and then I colored the cuffs and the images with the markers, leaving the mittens mostly white. Next, it was time to stamp the warm part of the sentiment. Again, I departed from my plan of black ink directly on the panel, and I decided I needed a little more of the red and green on the card. Don't ask me why, but instead of creating colored cardstock with the ink pads, I did it with the Copics. Maybe I thought the alcohol ink would dry more quickly and be ready for white embossing sooner. Yeah, that's it. I'm sticking with that. Anyway, I made the colored cardstock, stamped some additional words with the embossing ink, and then embossed with opaque white powder. When they were melted and smooth, I let them cool a second before I trimmed them down into little word strips, and I built my sentiment above and below the wishes word, popping these words up with foam tape. Now, my next card was not in my original plan at all. I was attracted by the simple font of the other Big Wishes stamp, and I thought it would be fun to have a variety of wishes on one card. I chose holiday, winter, warm, and best, thinking that these all relate to Christmas, so I knew I needed 4 wishes on my card. I love working with squares, and I stamped the word in the bottom right corner of my cardstock, then turned the cardstock in the MISTI to stamp it again. This is like a simplified tondo. You can turn any square piece of cardstock in your MISTI to create a pattern like this. When I had the 4 wishes stamped, I grabbed the 4 smaller words and 4 festive colors of ink: party dress, samba, lime Ricky, and Aquatini. And when that was done, I was happy with the graphic look of it, but I still had a big space in the center. I grabbed the Chillin Snowflakes set from last year. It has some pretty groovy designs, and I chose one that fit with the graphic feel, and I stamped it with the same black ink as the 4 wishes. And you know I love sparkle, and I didn't really see anywhere to put it in one spot, so I decided to cover the whole panel with it. I pounced my embossing pad over the whole panel to make it sticky, and then I poured Wanderlust embossing powder over top. This powder has the prettiest sparkle, and I'm just about out of it. I'm not sure I've actually ever finished a jar of embossing powder, well, other than the basics like clear and white. It's time to reorder. I heated it carefully, trying to make sure that I didn't miss heating any spots, and to be honest, I wasn't sure if everything would still be completely legible when I was finished, but it was. This is a simple, no-dimension design that still packs a sparkly, Christmassy punch. And if you see a little mistake I made in this photo, let me know in the comments below. Now we're at my final card. This was actually the card that I had planned the most thoroughly. Do you ever fall asleep thinking about a design and then wake up with improvements for it in the morning? That was this card. It all started because I couldn't figure out what this die cut was going to look like. So even before I cut the word and the shadow dies apart, I ran it through my die cutting machine and I got a surprising result, which you'll see in a second. Usually you would cut these two separately and get a word and a shadow. I wasn't expecting that I would get a different outline that actually works on its own as a word. So I cut a few more and I stacked them up with liquid glue to build some shaker walls. Then I used one of the negative areas from the die cuts as a stencil to blend my ink through. I taped it to my card panel with Post-it tape so I wouldn't get ink in places that I didn't want it, and I used a large Altenew blending tool to blend It's a Boy ink through. This will give me some color behind my shaker. Then I blended some more ink around the edges of the panel. Isn't it funny how adding just a touch of light blue actually makes the card look whiter? Color is amazing like that. I grabbed the warm and winter words from the Wishes stamp set and quickly realized they wouldn't both fit. Because of the colors of my card, I kept winter and I gave up on warm. I stamped the winter with Twilight ink. Then I got out that Mitten stamp set again and I stamped a couple of the tiny snowflakes in the It's a Boy ink in the bottom right corner to provide some balance above and below my shaker area. For some frosty sparkle, I spritzed the panel with that clear shimmer spray. To create the shaker window, I had to snip apart the two dies so I could get just the shadow portion from acetate. I used my mini die cutting machine and I added a piece of cardstock to act as a shim. I also ran it through a couple of times to be sure to get a clean cut. I rubbed some anti-static powder on the acetate and then I used a dry cloth to remove the excess powder. Then I took a final white die cut and I put liquid glue on the back of it before adding it to the acetate window, trying to line it up as perfectly as possible. I let that dry while I worked on filling my shaker. Because the lines are so fine, I knew I needed filler material with small pieces, and I chose this chunky iridescent glitter. I used that tool again to scoop glitter into each of the areas. I didn't know how well the glitter would move through the narrower areas of the shaker, so I tried to be sure that I had glitter everywhere I wanted it, just in case, and especially in the dot over the I, since it's completely separate from the rest of the word. Then I brushed off the extra pieces of glitter from the top of the shaker walls, I put liquid glue on the back of the shaker window, and I placed it over top. I put an acrylic block on top just to hold it in place while the glue dried. I love it when a plan comes together, and this card came together just as I had envisioned it, and despite its simple design, that shaker word is a showstopper.
I'd love to hear what your best planning tips are. Let me know in the comments below. I'm sure it's very personal and we all do things slightly differently, developing our methods over time. I think it's great to have a plan, even if it's a loose one. But being open to opportunity and new ideas that might come to me as I'm working often results in my best work. I've linked here to Ingrid's video, so be sure to hop over and see what she's created to inspire you. I'm also linking to my Light Up Christmas card video, where I show how to make interactive cards that are sure to get center place on someone's mantle. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.